Can you ask the rabbi to address the issue? I'm having a difficulty with understanding the so-called contradiction between what the Rebbe writes in the Hayom Yom of Daled Menachemov and what we see in reality. In yesterday's Hayom Yom, this letter was written to me on Heyav, so this is the day before, the fourth day of Menachemov. It says the following. I'm going to read it in Yiddish and translate it into English. Mit der größten Haravanya, kann man nicht verdienen, kein ein Cent mehr, wie viel Hashem Yisbarach hat abgestellt, als der Mensch soll verdienen. With the greatest effort, one cannot earn 1 penny more than Hashem fixed that this and this person should earn. Mit Afton, wie viel es ist nötig, a person must do as much as is necessary. Aber man muss gedenken, we must remember, however, as the ganze Arbeit is meant via Tafel, the work we do to earn a livelihood is only secondary. Der Ikir is the Bracha on Hashem Yisbarach. The most important thing is the blessing of Hashem. Und die Bracha verdient man, we earn this blessing, wenn man as an ehrlicher Yid, if we're earnest and sincere about being a Jew, tefillah b'tzibur, davening with a minyan, shmir Shabbos, keeping Shabbos with beauty, kashrus b'hashgacha, being very particular about kashrus, chinuch habonim, and raising our children by malamdim el chayidin, by teachers who are God-fearing people. And the question that this person is asking me, however, unfortunately, this isn't the case most of the time. How does this fit with what we actually see? This question is not only applied to Parnos, it applies to all matters. And it's the question of faith. We believe in God. We believe in the immanence of God. We believe in the proximity between God and the creation. Hashem is close to us. Hashem is close to the world. And if this is God's world and Hashem is close to the world, it should look like it's His. That the righteous should succeed, the evil should be punished, and we so often encounter the ill of tzaddik v'ra loy, that the righteous seem to suffer and the evil seem to be rewarded. And Parnosa is one example of it, but it's probably the most acute because certainly in America, it's the thing that people think about the most. More people worry about making a living than finding a spouse or having children or having healthy children or having even a meaningful life than anything else in the world. I think to some extent it's cultural and to some extent it's universal. So what is the answer to all questions that people have about faith? The overarching answer that people give to the questions of the reality of life versus faith is that you have to first have faith. In other words, the reward is not going to come on your timetable. That's not how Hashem operates. We have to live a certain way. The brachas of Hashem come on His timetable, and that requires faith. That means we have to let go. We can't just keep score, as it were, of my actions and His reactions and feel that unless His reactions happen according to my timetable, then, quote, it's not worth it for me to do my pro-actions in anticipation of His reactions if I can't predict them. From our end, we feel like it's not fair. From His end, it means that there is no faith. The faith is to trust, to let go and let God, as they say in some cultures. And that's where the bracha lies. The bracha lies in leaving it alone, in living the life that Hashem expects of us, and allowing the blessings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to come to us when the Eibishter is ready for them to come to us. And they do come to us. I'm going to get back to Parnasa in a moment. But before I go to Parnasa, I just want to speak about Yiddishkeit in general and the question of faith and proaction versus reaction, us living as Hashem wants versus Hashem providing for us what it is that we think we need and is important to us. My belief is that there's never been a time in history, certainly in recent history, where living the way the Eibishter tells us to live has greater reward on a human level than right now. The world is in such a state of upheaval. There is so much uncertainty, so much doubt, so much confusion about the most basic things, that having Torah, having Hashem, having Yiddishkeit is its own reward, perhaps in an unprecedented way. It's so easy to see why it's good to be a Jew. And I don't mean Jew being born biologically Jewish, but live by the values of Torah mitzvahs, because if nothing else, it gives you clarity. But it also gives you a meaning of life and the pleasure of that meaning, which so many people in this country, with all the money in the world, are lacking because of the confusion of the society. So you have to put this blessing of Parnasa in context. And the context is that the blessing of Judaism is the blessing of Judaism itself. We all see it, we know it. And perhaps we know it now in a more acute way than we ever did. So I need to say that up front. And when you, and of course, which leads to my second point, which is that when people talk about Parnasa, and maybe it's American, maybe it's Western, maybe it's always been this way, they see Parnasa as a closed system. I work and I earn money, as if that's the beginning and an end, there's nothing else in between. What's missing in this conversation, which is what the Rebbe talks about in his letters when addressing this question that you're asking, is the rest of life. Why do I need money? How hard I need to work to earn that money? How much I have to sacrifice to earn that money? Versus what kind of quality of life I'm going to have. A person makes a lot of money and they work 80 hours a week or 100 hours a week, and they spend it on medical bills or legal fees or fighting with their spouse, God forbid. Are they rich? Are they rich? And if you incorporate into life all the factors that are really important in life, and what's really important in life is, first of all, health, second of all, family, and peace, and children, and nachas, and a quality of life for yourself, which involves time to connect to your family, to connect to the Almighty, to learn Torah and do mitzvahs, and to show a little love to a fellow person. Those are the really important things in life. But if we talk about earning Parnasa and ignore all of those other factors, then this Hayom Yom will appear quite often to be terribly erroneous, terribly flawed. It's just not reflecting the fact. But if you incorporate all of these different factors, the playing field is leveled more than somewhat. It's leveled considerably. And I think that's a very important part of answering this question. In addition, I have a friend who's actually a sincere person and a chassid, who said to me once cynically that if Yossi, call me by name Yossi, if you want to make a lot of money, learn everything Chassidus says about Parnasa, do exactly the opposite, and you'll become very wealthy. Because Chassidus talks about the same ideas you have in this little passage here, trusting God and appreciating that the work that we do is only the keli, is only the vessel, and the Parnasa and the bracha comes from Him. So he said to me, in the real world, in the rat race of Elam Hazeh, it's not that way. You have to be very ambitious. You have to desire the money very much. You have to sacrifice so much in order to earn that money. And it becomes a singular pursuit, and so forth and so on. So in addition to the 2 points that I just made, number one, that Yiddishkeit is its own reward. And number two, when you don't speak of making a living and making money by itself, but in the context of real life, those two things alone substantially qualify this question. I'm going to say one more thing in response to the question. And that is that I believe, and I'm saying the word I believe emphatically because I cannot tell you that this is true, but I just believe that this is the case, that God can do anything He wants. But there's different levels of miracles. There are small miracles, there are bigger miracles, and there are bigger miracles, and there are bigger miracles. And for a person to get a very, very, very big miracle, they need to perform what you and I would call a very big miracle within themselves. In other words, if we live our lives by God's principles, which includes faith, most of us, our dedication and our sincerity, our faith are real, but not extreme. So the bracha that we get is equally not extreme. There are rare individuals whose trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no bounds whatsoever, and they open themselves up to extraordinary miracles. But practically speaking, they're the exception and they're not the rule. So in light of that, I want to say this. Parnasa is a subjective thing. In other words, a person starts out poor, and he asks Hashem for Parnasa. Now, he may think in his mind, I'd like to be a millionaire, but that's not how the Eibush that looks at it. It's Parnasa within the class that you find yourself in at the moment. If a person starts out in a higher earning bracket, that becomes their reality. That becomes what they call in America their standard of living. And the Parnasa the Eibush provides will reflect the same. If a person is very, very wealthy, so the parnasa that the Eibishter gives them is based on their wealth. Because the brachas of Hashem are in the context of the reality of the world. So a poor person who asks for parnasa will have parnasa. But the parnasa is going to reflect the level he's on at the moment. Maybe later on in his life he'll be able to earn more. Maybe his children will earn more. Maybe Hashem will shine mazel on him and he'll become very, very wealthy, which has its own brachas, but also has its own tests. But that's another component of the answer to this question. The bracha of parnasa is connected to our life. Not only in the spiritual sense, as the Hayom Yom describes it, but in the practical sense, as we are in our lives. And the brachas reflect the world in which we live in the time that we live it in. To give you an example, when the Jews came from Europe 2 generations before, my parents' generation, my father's generation, their expectations for parnasa were far lower than my parents were. Our expectations for parnasa are higher in turn than our parents were. And it has to do with the realities of life and our expectations and the nature of our prayer for parnasa. So each person's parnasa is not only a reflection of their learning and their davening, but it's a reflection of their reality. Not only what they expect out of the reality, but the reality itself. And I think that a little bit more addresses the question that you are asking. Now, I want to finish this Q&A by saying I really do not like to be in the position to have to explain God. Certainly not in the position of explaining those aspects of what God does that we may not necessarily like. To answer this question, you have to be such a big maimin and such a big batech. For me to answer this question, honestly, I would have to be such a big chassid who's so deeply connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I would see these things clearly. I'm a person with many limitations, including limitations of faith. And the only reason I'm answering the question is because not answering the question would be to you even worse than answering it, notwithstanding that my answer may be so limited. So in conclusion, I'm simply going to say I'm giving myself a bracha and you a bracha for 2 things. Number 1, for betachan and emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And number 2, for panasa barchava. And like the Rebbe writes in all of his letters, we shouldn't only have a lot of money, but it should go for healthy and peaceful things rather than combative and challenging things.